The night was silent, save for the wind fretting through the trees. In the distance, a lone farmhouse stood against the vast, open fields, its windows dark, its doors locked. But inside, something was stirring. Footsteps where there should have been none. Whispers that faded the moment anyone tried to listen. The family dismissed it at first, a trick of the mind, a restless imagination. Until one morning, in the fresh snow outside, they saw them. Footprints leading from the woods, but none returning. And by the time they understood what it meant, it was already too late. In a quiet Philadelphia neighborhood, a man searching for discarded rabbit traps stumbled upon something unexpected. An old cardboard box, its edges worn from the elements. But inside, beneath the tattered folds, was something he was never meant to find. A small child, fragile and lifeless, his body carefully placed as if waiting to be discovered. No name. No record of a missing boy matching his face. The only thing certain, was that someone had left him here, hoping he would be forgotten. 9 hikers set off into the frozen wilderness, their laughter echoing through the vast expanse of snow-covered peaks. They were young, fearless, experienced. Nothing they hadn't faced before. Until something, or someone, changed everything. Days later, search teams found their camp. The tent was still standing, half buried in the ice. But the hikers were gone. Their bodies scattered miles apart. Some barely clothed, others with injuries no one could explain. And the most chilling part? The way they had run. Away from the safety of their shelter, away from the only thing that could have kept them alive. But what were they running from? Tonight, we revisit some of the most perplexing mysteries in true crime history. Cases with no answers. Lives cut short without justice. Stories that refuse to fade into the past. And as the rain falls outside your window, as the night stretches on, one question remains. How many of these stories will ever truly be solved? We begin with a family on a quiet farm, where the sound of footsteps in the attic was only the first warning. Story 1. The farmhouse stood alone at the edge of the forest, miles away from the nearest village. Isolated. Quiet. The kind of place where the wind carried whispers through the rafters, where the trees loomed like silent watchers, their branches twisting against the sky. At night, the darkness stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the faint glow of a lantern flickering behind a curtained window. A single beacon of life in an expanse of shadow. For the Gruber family, this was home. Acres of farmland, a sturdy barn, a life built on routine. They knew the land, the changing seasons, the long winters that pressed in around them. They knew the sound of the river in the distance, the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath their feet. But in recent weeks, there were other sounds. Things they could not explain. It started small. A misplaced tool, a strange indentation in the fresh snow. The old house groaned at night, but now, the noises felt different. More deliberate. A rustling in the hay when no one was in the barn. A faint shuffle of steps in the attic above their heads. Footsteps where no footsteps should be. The animals sensed it too. The horses, usually calm, stood restless in their stalls, their breath coming out in heavy, uncertain bursts. The family dog, loyal and sharp, had begun to growl at the empty corners of the room, staring into the darkness as if seeing something his owners could not. And then, the footprints appeared. In the morning light, crisp and unmistakable, they stretched across the snow, leading from the edge of the forest to the back door of the farmhouse. They were deep, fresh. A single set. But there were no prints leading away. Whoever had come, had never left. And yet, when Andreas Gruber searched the property, he found nothing. No one. The attic was empty, the barn undisturbed. The doors were locked just as they had been the night before. No sign of a visitor, no evidence of an intruder. But still, the unease lingered. A weight in the air. An itch at the back of the mind that refused to be ignored. Andreas mentioned the footprints to his neighbors. brushed it off as strange, but harmless. A curiosity. Something to be aware of, perhaps, but not something to fear. The old man had lived on the farm for years. He had seen harsh winters, stray travelers, wild animals venturing too close. There was always an explanation. Always. And yet, days later, the maid packed her bags and left. She had only been working at Hinterkaifeck for a short time, but she was certain, there was something wrong with that house. Something that could not be explained. She spoke of the footsteps, of the creaking floorboards when no one was there. She refused to stay another night. The family carried on. They locked their doors. They kept to their routines. They convinced themselves it was nothing. But outside, beyond the walls of the farmhouse, beyond the flickering lantern and the stretch of open field, something waited. 6 days later, every member of the Gruber family was dead. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A misplaced tool. A window left open that no one remembered unlocking. Small things, barely worth a second thought. On a farm, the days were long, the work was endless, and exhaustion had a way of making the mind play tricks. A creak in the floorboards could be the house settling. A faint rustling in the barn could be the wind. That's what Andreas Gruber told himself. What he told his wife. What he told his daughter. But each night, as the lamps were dimmed and the farm slipped into silence, the unease crept in again. Victoria, his daughter, had heard it too. The first time, she thought it was a dream, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps above her room, just beyond the ceiling beams. The attic was small, meant for storage. No one ever went up there at night. But as she lay in bed, her breath held tight in her chest, the sound came again. Soft, measured. Moving from one end of the attic to the other. Then, nothing. In the morning, she checked the attic. The wooden boards were undisturbed. No footprints in the dust. No sign that anyone had been there. She told herself she must have imagined it. But the feeling of being watched did not leave her. Then there were the voices. Faint, almost too quiet to notice, drifting through the walls when the house should have been silent. At first, they seemed distant, like the echo of a conversation carried on the wind. But the more the family listened, the more certain they became, the voices were inside. One night, little Kazilia, just 7 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide and uncertain. "I heard someone whispering outside my window," she said. Her mother shushed her, told her she was imagining things, but she still checked the yard. The moon was high, casting long shadows over the fields, but there was no one there. Just the empty land stretching toward the forest, the outline of the barn standing motionless in the dark. Then came the footprints. One morning, after a late snowfall, Andreas stepped outside and saw them. Deep impressions in the fresh powder, leading from the edge of the wood straight to the back door. A single trail, clear and undisturbed. He followed them with careful steps, his breath curling in the cold air. The track stopped at the threshold, but there were none leading away. Whoever had left them had not returned the way they came. And yet, there was no sign of forced entry. The doors were locked. The windows shut. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been moved. He checked the barn, the attic, the cellar. Every corner of the house. No sign of an intruder. But still, the unease remained. The maid had sensed it too. She had only been working at Hinterkaifeck for a short time, but in those weeks, the house had begun to feel wrong. The air was heavy. The night stretched too long. She could hear things, movements when the family was asleep, the scrape of wood against wood when no one was near. It wasn't just the attic. It was the hallways. The kitchen. Even the barn. As if the house was no longer empty when it should have been. Then, one evening, she saw something. She never said what. She never explained. She simply packed her things and left. Walked away from the farm, from her job, from everything she knew. And before she disappeared down the road, she left the family with one final warning. This house is not right. The day passed like any other. Chores were done. The animals fed. The fire crackled in the hearth, pushing back the cold that crept in through the old wooden beams. The family moved through their routines, unaware that by nightfall, the house would fall silent forever. It is not known exactly how it began. There were no witnesses. No cries for help that reached the ears of passing travelers. No signs of struggle, no hurried escape. Only what was left behind. At some point in the evening, Andreas Gruber stepped outside. Perhaps he heard a noise in the barn, something out of place. A loose board shifting, an animal startled by movement unseen. Or maybe there was nothing at all. Maybe it was just the pull of instinct, the subtle nudge that lured him toward the open doors. He never came back. Moments later, his wife, Kazilia, followed. The house was small. The family close. If Andreas had called out, even in the slightest, she would have heard him. Perhaps she simply wondered why he had not returned. Perhaps she thought nothing of it at all. But she too stepped across the threshold, and she too was swallowed by the dark. Then Victoria. Then little Kazilia. One by one, they left the warmth of the house and walked straight into death. The barn was still. The air heavy with the scent of hay and damp earth. The wooden beams stretched high above, lost in the shadows. Somewhere in the darkness, a presence waited. A figure standing just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. And as each member of the family entered, they were struck down where they stood. The weapon, a mattock. A tool meant for breaking soil, now used to shatter bone. The blows were precise. Brutal. Skull after skull caved beneath its weight, the sound lost in the hush of the night. There was no struggle. No fight. Only the soft thud of bodies collapsing into the straw, one after the other. Inside the house, 6-month-old Joseph slept in his crib, untouched. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had arrived that very day, unpacking her belongings, settling into the unfamiliar space. Neither of them had any way of knowing that just a few feet away, the rest of the household had already been wiped from existence. But the killer was not finished. When they stepped out of the barn and back into the house, they did not rush. They did not flee. They did not take what they could and vanish into the night. Instead, they walked calmly through the rooms, moving as if they belonged there. And then they did the unthinkable. They stayed. For 3 days, the farm remained occupied. Not by its owners, but by the one who had ended them. The cows were milked. The animals fed. Smoke curled from the chimney as the hearth was stoked, warming a house that no longer had a family to fill it. The neighbors saw the glow of lanterns in the windows at night. They assumed all was well. That life carried on as it always had. It was only when the Grubers failed to show themselves in town, when the schoolteacher noticed little Kazilia's absence, when the mail piled up untouched, that someone thought to check. And when they did, they found the barn first. The bodies were lined in the straw, half covered, as if someone had tried, however feebly, to conceal them. The wounds told the story. The mattock had done its work. But there was something else. A detail that would haunt the investigators who arrived in the days that followed. Little Kazilia. The last to be killed. The only one who had not died instantly. Her hands were tangled in her own hair, clumps torn from her scalp. It was clear, she had lived for hours after the attack. Long enough to feel the weight of death pressing in around her. Long enough to understand she was alone. Inside the house, the bodies of Maria and Joseph lay undisturbed. The maid in her bed, the baby still in his crib. There was no mercy. No reason. No answer. And the one who had done it? Gone. Without a trace. No footprints leaving the farm. No signs of forced entry. No stolen valuables. 6 lives taken, and yet, whoever had done it had not disappeared into the night in a hurry. They had lingered. Moved through the house. Slept under its roof. Ate from its kitchen. And then, without a word, without a single misstep, they were gone. In the days that followed, the town whispered. Who could have done such a thing? What kind of person could stay among the dead, unbothered, unshaken? The answers, if they existed, were buried beneath the blood-stained straw, lost somewhere in the shadows of Hinterkaifeck. Theories emerged. Some whispered of a drifter, someone passing through. A stranger who took what they wanted, then vanished into the forests beyond. But that didn't explain the footprints in the snow. It didn't explain why nothing was taken. It didn't explain why the animals were fed, the fires stoked, the lanterns lit as if the farm still had a family inside it. The police turned their attention to those who had once walked the land, those who knew the house, who knew the family. One name rose to the surface, Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. Reported killed in the war, his body never recovered. Could he have returned? Changed by what he had seen, what he had done. Some believed it was possible. That he had come back to a life that no longer felt like his own. But there was no proof. No trace of him beyond whispers and speculation. Then, there was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had first discovered the bodies. His behavior struck some as unusual. He was the one who led others into the barn, who moved the corpses before the authorities arrived. He spoke of the farm as if he knew it too well, as if he had been there before when no one else was. And there was something else. His past with Victoria. It was no secret that Lorenz and Victoria had been involved. That she had once claimed he was the father of her young son, Joseph. A claim he had publicly denied. Some wondered, was it guilt that led him back to the farm that day? Or was it something else? But there was no evidence, nothing to tie him to the killings beyond suspicion and circumstance. Then came the theory that disturbed the town the most. That the killer had been there all along. That the weeks of strange sounds, shifting shadows, whispers in the night, were not the wind. Not the house settling. Not imagination. That someone had been living in the attic. Watching. Waiting. Moving through the home as if it were theirs. Had they been watching as the family ate dinner? Had they stood in the dark as little Casilia climbed into bed? Had they waited, patient and unseen, until the moment was right? If true, it meant the family had not been alone in those final nights. That every breath they took, every door they locked, every glance over their shoulder, was never enough. Despite countless investigations, no one was ever caught. No one was ever charged. The farmhouse stood empty, its walls holding the secrets of that night, but even those would not last. The building was torn down in 1923, the land left barren, the past buried beneath the soil. But some say, the echoes remain. That when the wind moves through the trees just right, when the night is quiet enough, you can still hear it, the sound of footsteps in the hay. The investigation stretched late into the night. Lanterns flickered against the farmhouse walls, casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Officers moved carefully through the home, their footsteps echoing in rooms that had been full of life just days before. Now, they stood empty. Cold. The smell of damp hay still lingered in the air, mixing with something else, something heavier, something that would never quite leave this place. Each room told a story. The kitchen table, undisturbed, as if waiting for the family to return. The fireplace, its embers long dead. The crib in the corner, silent. There were no signs of forced entry. No sign of a struggle. No shattered glass, no broken locks. Whoever had done this had not needed to fight their way in. They had already been inside. And then, an officer glanced upward. The attic was small, its entrance barely noticeable above the hallway. A simple wooden hatch, blending into the ceiling. Dust clung to its edges, undisturbed, at least, at first glance. But as the officer reached up, his fingers brushing the surface, he hesitated. There, against the wood, were smudges. Faint, but unmistakable. The kind left behind by hands pressing up from below. As if someone had climbed in. Or, climbed out. They pulled the hatch open. The air was thick, unmoving. The lantern's glow barely reached into the cramped space above. Cobwebs stretched between the beams, dust swirling in the light. And then, footprints. Not fresh, but not old enough to be forgotten. A path worn into the dust, where someone had walked. Where someone had sat. Where someone had waited. In the corner, they found the straw. A small, flattened space, as if someone had been lying there for days. Nearby, discarded food scraps, as though a meal had been eaten in complete silence. And then, something worse, impressions in the wood, deep grooves where fingers had gripped the beams. Right above the family's bedrooms. Whoever had been here, had been listening. They had been there before the massacre. They had heard every conversation, every whispered fear. Every mention of the noises in the night. They had seen Victoria tuck her daughter into bed. They had watched as the lamps were dimmed, as the house fell quiet. And then, when the moment was right, they had climbed down, and never left. The footprints leading to the farm. The voices in the dark. The attic. It had all been real. But if the killer had been living above them, waiting, watching, the real question remained. Where had they gone? Story 2. The woods stretched for miles, tangled and unkempt. Bare trees clawed at the sky, their twisted limbs unmoving in the late winter air. The ground, still damp from the previous night's rain, held on to footprints longer than it should have, deep impressions in the cold earth, leading nowhere in particular. To most, these woods were unremarkable. Forgotten land on the outskirts of Philadelphia, passed by without a second glance. But on that day, for one man, the silence felt different. He hadn't planned on stopping. He had been walking along the road, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his breath coming out in short, white puffs. Maybe he was lost in thought. Maybe he had no destination at all. But then, something caught his eye. Just off the road, barely visible through the brush. A shape that didn't belong. At first, it was nothing. Just an old box, discarded like so many others. People dump things here all the time, broken furniture, old clothing, things they no longer wanted. But as he stepped closer, something about this box felt off. It hadn't been there yesterday. The cardboard, creased and worn, sagged slightly under the weight of whatever was inside. And then, as he moved around it, his breath caught in his throat. A small, bare foot. He froze. For a moment, he wondered if his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. Pale against the darkness of the box, motionless. He took another step. Then another. And then he saw the rest. A child, curled inside. The body small, fragile. The skin, marked with bruises. The arms tucked in close, as if still seeking warmth that would never come. The face, eyes shut, lips slightly parted, frozen in an expression that was neither peaceful nor pained, just empty. No name. No sound. Just a boy left in a box, alone in the woods, waiting to be found. The man took a step back. His stomach turned. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Something about the child held him there, rooted in place. How long had he been here? Who had left him? And why, on this forgotten stretch of land, in a place where no one was supposed to find him, had he been found at all? He didn't know it then. But this discovery was only the beginning. The boy was taken from the woods in silence. Carefully lifted from the box, placed onto a stretcher, and driven away under an overcast sky. He had no name. No record. No one waiting for him at the hospital or calling the police in desperation. He was alone, and for now, the only certainty was this: someone had left him there, hoping he would never be found. The investigation began immediately. Officers scoured the area, boots sinking into the damp earth as they searched for anything, a clue, a misplaced object, a set of footprints leading away from the scene. But the rain had washed the ground clean. If anyone had been there before, they had vanished without a trace. The box itself was the first real piece of evidence. Worn, but intact. A shipping label still clung to one side, faded but legible. It had once held a bassinet, sold at a nearby department store. Investigators followed the lead, tracking down dozens of customers who had purchased the same model. One by one, they were questioned. One by one, they were cleared. The box had led them to a dead end. Then, there was the blanket. Thin, flannel, wrapped loosely around the boy's small frame. The pattern was distinct, a faded plaid design, frayed at the edges from years of use. It wasn't new. It had belonged to someone for a long time. But where it had come from, no one knew. And without a name, without a family searching for him, there was little to compare it to. The boy's fingerprints were taken. His dental records catalogued. His face was reconstructed, hoping someone, anyone, would recognize him. Flyers were printed, posted in shop windows, pinned to telephone poles, stuffed into mailboxes. The newspapers ran the story. A young child, found alone, waiting to be identified. The city held its breath, expecting an answer. But no answer came. No parent stepped forward. No neighbor recalled a missing child. No school reported an empty desk where a little boy should have been. He didn't match any missing persons case. It was as if he had never existed at all. Investigators refused to let it go. Days turned into weeks, then months. Sketches were sent across the country, reaching far beyond Philadelphia. Leads trickled in, calls from concerned citizens, stories of a boy who looked familiar, a child who had disappeared from another town. Each one was followed. Each one led nowhere. As time passed, the case took on a new, more unsettling question. How does a child go unnoticed? How does a young boy, no more than 4 or 5 years old, vanish from his home, his neighborhood, his life, without anyone speaking his name? Investigators were left with two possibilities. Either no one had ever reported him missing, or no one had ever intended to. The case remained open. The boy's face, frozen in time, stared back from police bulletins and faded newspaper clippings. Officers retired, new detectives took over. Years passed. Decades. And still, no one came forward. No name. No history. Just a mystery growing colder with each passing year. And then, decades later, a breakthrough. The case refused to fade. It lingered in the minds of detectives, journalists, and those who couldn't shake the image of the boy in the box. A child without a name, without a past, left alone in the woods as if he had never existed at all. If no one had come forward to claim him, then where had he come from? And perhaps more importantly, why had no one been looking for him? Over the years, theories emerged. Some built on fragments of evidence, others fueled by speculation. But each one carried the same unspoken question: was this boy simply forgotten, or had someone wanted him to be? One of the first theories seemed the most obvious. Was he an orphan? A child who had slipped through the cracks, born into a life where no one knew his name to begin with? If he had come from an overcrowded institution, shuffled between caretakers, it was possible no one had noticed when he disappeared. A face among many, lost in a system that had failed him. But when investigators searched through adoption records, orphanage logs, and foster home reports, they found nothing. No missing child matching his description. No paperwork. No trace of him at all. Then, there was a darker possibility. One whispered among investigators: though few wanted to believe it. What if he had been taken? A victim of something larger, something hidden beneath the surface? The scars on his body suggested a history of pain, injuries that could not be explained by a simple accident. Could he have been a child held against his will, part of a world few ever see? A life spent in the shadows, unseen, unheard, until the day he was no longer needed. But even as detectives followed leads into the underbelly of missing children's cases, the boy's past remained out of reach. No one recognized him. No networks, no reports, no answers. And then, there was the woman. A name whispered in police circles years after the case had gone cold. She had come forward with a story that unsettled even the most hardened investigators. She claimed to know the truth. She spoke of a boy, this boy. A child born into a family that never wanted him. She said he had been passed from home to home, a secret no one spoke of. And then, one night, an accident. A mistake that could not be undone. Fear took over. Panic set in. And instead of seeking help, they made a choice. A choice to erase him. Her story was detailed. Too detailed. She knew things that had never been made public. The injuries. The way the boy had been wrapped in the blanket. The placement of the box. But when pressed, she refused to give names. She would not say where, or how, or why. Just that it had happened. And that the truth would never be known. Could she have been telling the truth? Or was she just another voice adding to the mystery? Without proof, the theory remained just that, a theory. A possibility that could never be confirmed, only questioned. Years passed. Investigators retired. Theories stacked upon theories, each one a road leading nowhere. An orphan. A lost child. A victim of something unspoken. A boy no one was meant to remember. But the case was not over. Because even as the years stretched on, as time tried to bury his story, the boy in the box was never truly forgotten. For years, his case remained frozen. A face without a name. A story without an ending. Decades passed, and with them, the voices that once spoke his name, if they ever had, fell silent. The world moved on. Investigators retired. Witnesses aged. What once had been a desperate search for answers became nothing more than a file buried deep in the archives, its pages yellowing with time. But some mysteries refused to fade. It had been nearly 70 years since the boy was found, yet the questions surrounding him remained as haunting as ever. Who was he? Where had he come from? And why had no one searched for him? Theories had come and gone, evidence had been re-examined, but the truth remained just out of reach, until science finally caught up to the past. DNA. A technology once thought impossible in the early days of the investigation. In the 1950s, fingerprints and dental records were the limits of forensic identification. Blood types could be matched, physical traits catalogued, but without a name, there was nowhere to begin. The boy had no missing persons report. No paper trail. He had been lost in life, and in death, he remained just as invisible. But now, decades later, the very thing that had once held detectives back, the lack of records, the absence of history, became the key to unlocking his identity. In a lab, under the careful hands of forensic genealogists, the smallest fragments of his DNA were extracted, preserved all those years in the hope that one day, they would lead somewhere. The process was slow, painstaking. A digital web began to form, distant relatives, branches of a family tree stretching back through generations. Each connection was a step closer. Each name, a piece of a puzzle that had remained unsolved for more than half a century. And then, a match. It wasn't a direct hit. The boy had no record in any database, no birth certificate readily available. But a distant cousin, an ancestral link, just enough to begin the search in the right place. Bit by bit, the past began to unfold. A family name. A lineage. And finally, after years of only being known by the place he was found, the boy in the box had a name of his own. Joseph Augustus Sorelli. His name had been lost for decades, buried beneath unanswered questions and fading memories. But now, spoken aloud for the first time in nearly 70 years, it became real. He was no longer just a child in an unmarked grave, no longer a case file tucked away in storage. He was Joseph. A boy who had lived. A boy who had been loved, once, somewhere, by someone. But even as his name was returned to him, the questions remained. Because while science had given him back his identity, it had not revealed the truth of what had happened to him. Who had left him in the woods? Who had failed to speak his name all those years? Who had decided that Joseph Augustus Sorelli did not deserve to be found? The mystery was far from over. If anything, it had only just begun. For decades, his name was lost. Now, it is known. Joseph Augustus Sorelli. But a name alone does not bring justice. It does not answer the questions that remain. Who took his life? Who abandoned him in the woods, wrapped in a tattered blanket, left in a cardboard box as if he had never mattered? The silence that surrounded his death has never truly lifted. And even now, though his identity has been restored, the truth of his final moments remains just out of reach. Perhaps the answer still exists somewhere, buried in old records, locked away in the fading memory of someone who was there. Perhaps the person responsible walks among us, living in the comfort of years stolen from a child who never had the chance to grow up. Or perhaps, the truth will never be known. But there are other cases. Other lives taken, other stories left unfinished. Some, like Joseph's, remain unsolved for decades. Others leave behind a scene so disturbing, so incomprehensible, that even the most seasoned investigators struggle to make sense of what they have found. A cabin. Isolated, surrounded by towering trees. A place meant for rest, for quiet. But inside, the air is thick with something else. A stillness that does not belong. A crime so brutal, so inexplicable, that even after all these years, the full truth remains just beyond reach. A family, slaughtered in the night. No clear motive. No sign of forced entry. And a single word whispered by those who first stepped inside. Impossible. Story 3. Nestled deep within the mountains, hidden behind miles of winding forest roads, sits a small cabin. A place untouched by the chaos of the outside world. In the summer, the trees stretch high, their canopies thick enough to swallow the sky. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The lake nearby reflects the stars at night, its surface undisturbed except for the occasional ripple of something unseen beneath. To those who visit, the town feels frozen in time. A single road leads in and out, lined with aging storefronts where shopkeepers still greet customers by name. The diner, with its faded sign and fogged-up windows, serves coffee so strong it lingers on the breath long after the last sip. There is a comfort here, a simplicity. A quiet that most would call peaceful. But isolation has its price. When night falls, the roads grow empty. The streetlights cast long shadows, barely reaching the edges of the darkened forest. The cabins, scattered along the lake and hidden between trees, stand silent. No passing cars. No neighbors close enough to hear a cry for help. Just the wind moving through the trees, the steady rhythm of the water against the shore, and whatever else might be listening. Some places hold on to their history, their secrets. And in this town, in this cabin, something remains. A past that refuses to stay buried. A story that, even now, lingers in the walls, in the floorboards, in the spaces where laughter once echoed but now only silence remains. Morning comes slowly in the mountains. The first light filters through the trees, casting long shadows over the dirt road leading to the cabin. The town is waking, coffee brewing in old kitchens, the faint murmur of radios playing the day's weather report. But here, at the edge of the forest, something is wrong. The cabin stands quiet, its windows dark. No sounds of life. No movement behind the curtains. Inside, the air is still. Cold. The scent of pine and dust lingers, but beneath it, something else. Something unmistakable. The kitchen table remains set from the night before, plates stacked, silverware untouched. A jacket, carelessly draped over the back of a chair, unmoved. But in the next room. A mother. Her son. His best friend. All gone. Their final moments written into the walls, the floorboards, the very foundation of the cabin itself. The violence here was not rushed, not impulsive. It was deliberate. Unrelenting. A force that should not have belonged in a place like this. The room tells its own story. A struggle. The unmistakable signs of panic, of fight, of fear. The aftermath is devastating. And yet, it is not the only mystery. Because someone is missing. A girl. Vanished without a trace. No footprints in the dirt. No signs of forced entry or escape. As if, in the middle of the night, she simply ceased to exist. And then, the most unsettling discovery of all. Just feet away, in another room, 2 boys lay undisturbed. Asleep through it all. The walls between them and the horror on the other side nothing more than thin wood and silence. Why? That question would haunt this case for years. How could something so brutal happen in a space so small, and yet leave 2 children untouched? How could one girl vanish while the others were left behind? And what does it mean when violence this unrelenting is carried out with such precision? A crime this brutal should have left chaos in its wake, broken windows, shattered locks, a door forced open in the dead of night. But there was none of that. No signs of struggle at the entrance, no splintered wood or pried open latch. Nothing to suggest an intruder had forced their way inside. And yet, someone had been here. Someone had moved through this cabin, room by room, unseen, unheard. Someone had stepped into this space, taken their time, and left without a trace. Then, there was the knife. Lodged deep into the wooden wall, its handle jutting out at an unnatural angle. It did not belong to the cabin. It was not from the kitchen. Whoever had placed it there had done so with purpose. But why? A message? A warning? Or something else entirely? The walls held more than just silence. The sheets in the untouched beds, still neatly folded. The refrigerator door, slightly ajar, the light inside casting a dull glow against the empty floor. Even the chairs at the table remained where they had been the night before, as if waiting for their occupants to return. Everything frozen in place, except for the undeniable evidence of what had happened in the next room. And then, there was the town itself. The neighboring cabins, just far enough away to create an illusion of solitude. People had been nearby, sleeping, unaware, living out their nights undisturbed. The walls here were thin. The air carried sound. A single scream should have been enough to shatter the quiet, to rattle a light sleeper awake. But no one had heard a thing. No forced entry. No one woken by a struggle. A weapon left behind in a way that made no sense. It was as if the crime had unfolded outside of time itself, a moment of horror that came and went without disrupting the world beyond these walls. As if, for just one night, this place had been sealed off from everything else, and left to its fate. Every case leaves behind unanswered questions, but this one had too many. A crime this brutal should have led straight to a suspect, a motive, a reason. But from the beginning, nothing made sense. The lack of forced entry. The methodical precision. The untouched children in the next room. The missing girl who vanished as if she had never been there at all. And then, the investigation itself, the way it unfolded, the way it stalled, the way it seemed to twist in on itself, raising more doubts than answers. At first, investigators focused on those closest to the victims. Family. Friends. Acquaintances with reasons, real or imagined, to hold a grudge. But the deeper they looked, the more the case unraveled. Stories conflicted. Timelines blurred. Witnesses remembered details that didn't fit. And then there was the sheriff, the man in charge of finding the truth. His handling of the case was questionable. Evidence went missing. Statements were taken but never recorded. Tracks that should have been followed led to dead ends, not because they weren't there, but because someone had stopped looking. Some whispered about corruption. A cover-up. A sheriff protecting someone with power, someone with influence. Others believed it was simpler than that. Incompetence. A man out of his depth, overwhelmed by a crime he couldn't explain, choosing silence over admitting failure. But then came another possibility. One that was even more unsettling. What if the killer was never far away? What if they weren't some faceless stranger passing through in the night, but someone who knew this town, who knew this cabin, who knew exactly when and how to strike? Someone who watched as the investigation twisted itself into knots, knowing that the deeper authorities dug, the further they'd be from the truth. Someone who, even now, had never really left. Despite multiple suspects, despite years of speculation, the case remains unsolved. The truth, whatever it is, lies buried beneath missing files, fading memories, and a silence that refuses to break. But this story is not the last. There are others, just as chilling, just as unexplainable. Some crimes leave behind traces, evidence, something to hold on to. Others become something more. A mystery that defies logic, that lingers long after the case has gone cold. And now, we move from a small cabin, to one of the strangest deaths in history. Story 4. It started with careful preparation. Every piece of gear accounted for. Every route studied, every risk considered. These were not amateurs setting out on a reckless journey. They were skilled, disciplined, familiar with the brutal conditions they would face. Their goal? To push themselves to the limit, to reach the peak, and return with stories of triumph against the elements. They left behind letters, notes to loved ones promising safe return. Smiling photographs, capturing the excitement of what lay ahead. Their packs were heavy, filled with everything they would need to survive: warm clothing, food rations, compasses, maps. The cold was unforgiving, but they had faced it before. They understood the dangers of the mountains, the unpredictability of nature. And still, they pressed forward. Their path took them deep into the Ural Mountains, where the landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. Miles of untouched snow, towering ridgelines, valleys carved by time and weather. The air was sharp, each breath burning against their lungs. But their spirits remained high. They laughed, they documented their journey, they set up camp each night with precision. There was no sign of hesitation. No doubt. No fear. The last known photographs show them smiling, their breath visible in the freezing air. One of them waves at the camera, another adjusts their gear. A moment frozen in time, one that no one could have known would be their last. 9 hikers entered the mountains, following a trail they had mapped out carefully. Their destination was clear. Their return, expected. But days passed. Then weeks. And when a search party finally set out to find them, what they discovered was something no one could explain. They had been missing for weeks. Their families waited. The search teams pushed forward, battling the cold, retracing the path the hikers had once followed. Every step deeper into the wilderness brought new uncertainty. Would they find footprints leading to shelter? A hastily built snow cave? Any sign that the group had fought against the odds and survived? But then, through the white haze of the mountains, something appeared. A shape. Fabric, stiffened by ice. A tent, half buried in the snow. But something was wrong. The tent was collapsed, its structure broken. More than that, its entrance had not been unzipped. It had been shredded. The fabric, torn open from the inside. As if someone, or something, had clawed their way out in a frantic escape. Inside, the hikers' belongings remained. Boots, jackets, supplies. All left behind, abandoned. The only thing missing, was them. The search continued beyond the ruined tent. And soon, the bodies were found. Scattered across the frozen landscape. Some near the tree line, as if they had run for their lives, desperate to escape something unseen. Others lying in the open snow, half-dressed, exposed to the brutal cold. Some had no shoes. No protective clothing. Their skin burned with frostbite, their fingers curled as if they had clawed at the ice in their final moments. But what disturbed the investigators most, was the condition of the bodies. One had a skull so badly fractured, it should have been the result of a catastrophic fall. But there was no sign of a drop. Another was missing his eyes. One of the young women, her tongue was gone. Removed, with no trace of how or why. The injuries weren't consistent with an avalanche, nor did they match the expected patterns of hypothermia. And yet, there were no signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. No footprints leading to their location, except their own. The evidence told a story no one could understand. The hikers had fled their shelter in a panic, braving sub-zero temperatures with no protection. They had run into the night, into the deep snow, where they met an end no one could explain. And the only witness to what happened, was the mountain itself. The facts were there. A group of experienced hikers. A torn open tent. Bodies scattered across the snow, their injuries defying logic. But as investigators pieced together what little they could, one question remained: what had sent them fleeing into the night? What had driven them from shelter, without shoes, without coats, without any chance of survival? The first theory was the simplest: an avalanche. A sudden wall of snow crashing down the mountainside, burying their tent, forcing them to escape. But there was a problem. No signs of a slide. No debris. No packed snow that would have crushed their shelter or left them buried beneath it. The conditions weren't right. The mountain had not shifted. And yet, something had made them run. Then came the second theory. One that whispered of classified experiments, of military tests hidden deep within the frozen wilderness. When investigators examined the hikers' clothing, they found something unexpected: radiation. Not enough to explain their deaths, but more than should have been there. Traces of something unnatural, something they should not have encountered. Had they stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time? Had they seen something they were never meant to witness? The Soviet government denied any involvement. But some records from that time remain missing. Then, there was the final theory. The one that couldn't be measured by science or reason. The one that spoke of something beyond human understanding. The injuries on their bodies, massive internal trauma without external wounds. Eyes missing. A tongue gone. Some claimed the mountain itself was cursed, that the land was never meant to be disturbed. Others pointed to an old legend, a name given to that place long before the hikers ever arrived. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, it was called Kholat Syakal. The Mountain of the Dead. The truth remains buried beneath the ice, locked away in the silence of the mountains. No definitive answers. No final explanation. Only questions. Only theories. And a case that refuses to be forgotten. But now, we move from the isolation of the wilderness to a place filled with people. A modern mystery. One caught on camera. A young woman, alone in an elevator. Acting strangely. Speaking to something that isn't there. And days later, she is found in a place no one can explain. Story 5. It is the last known footage of Elisa Lam. A grainy, black and white security recording from inside an elevator. The timestamp flickers in the corner of the screen. The doors slide open. And she steps inside. At first, nothing seems unusual. She presses a button on the panel, waiting for the doors to close. But they don't. The elevator remains open, motionless. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other. Looks over her shoulder. Then, she steps back, pressing multiple buttons, as if trying to get the elevator to move. It doesn't. Then, her behavior changes. She moves cautiously toward the door, leaning out into the hallway. She looks left. Right. As if searching for something, or someone. But the camera captures only the empty corridor beyond. She quickly steps back inside, pressing against the wall. Her hands move in strange, fluid gestures, as if she's speaking to someone unseen. Her fingers splay, twist, as if she's tracing invisible shapes in the air. For a moment, she disappears from the frame, out of view. Then, she returns, stepping out of the elevator completely, into the hallway. The doors remain open. They do not close. Minutes pass. The elevator never moves. Then, just as suddenly as they had stopped, the doors close. Open again. Close once more. The footage ends. This is the last confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam. She was never seen alive again. It began as a small complaint. A minor inconvenience. Guests at the Cecil Hotel noticed something was wrong with the water. It ran slow, the pressure weak, as if something in the pipes was restricting the flow. A nuisance, but nothing more. Then, the complaints became more frequent. Some guests described the water as having a strange taste, faint at first, barely noticeable, but enough to make them pause. Others reported a smell. Subtle, at the edge of perception, difficult to describe. A heaviness in the air that lingered long after the tap was turned off. As the days passed, the reports grew more alarming. The water was no longer just slow or strange smelling. It had taken on a color, dark, murky, almost black in the dim light of the hotel bathrooms. Some guests recoiled in disgust. Others, unaware, continued to drink it, to bathe in it, to brush their teeth, never questioning what they couldn't yet understand. It wasn't until the front desk could no longer ignore the complaints that they sent a maintenance worker to investigate. He climbed the stairs, past locked doors and silent hallways, until he reached the rooftop. Four large water tanks stood before him, exposed to the open sky, their lids secured, or so they should have been. One of the lids was open. He stepped closer, peering over the edge. At first, the water looked still. Black, opaque, undisturbed. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A shape beneath the surface. A figure, floating in the depths. What he had found was Elisa Lam. The discovery of Elisa Lam's body inside the rooftop water tank raised more questions than it answered. The police had an official conclusion: an accident. A tragic, solitary mistake. But that explanation left too many gaps. Too many impossibilities. Because the more investigators examined the details, the less sense they made. To start, there was the question of access. The water tanks were not easy to reach. The doors to the hotel rooftop were locked, alarmed, inaccessible to guests. Yet Elisa had made it up there, unnoticed, without triggering a single alarm. Even if she had found a way onto the roof, there was another obstacle: the water tank itself. Each one was large, industrial, standing tall above the concrete. The heavy lids were designed to stay shut, requiring force to remove. And yet, she was found inside. The lid, some reports claimed, was closed when her body was discovered. Others said it was open. There was no clear answer. Only one question: if Elisa had climbed in by herself, how did she close the lid behind her? Then there was the footage, the last known moments of Elisa Lam, recorded by a security camera in the hotel elevator. A video that would spread across the internet, dissected by millions, frame by frame. In it, Elisa appears distressed. She steps inside the elevator, presses multiple buttons, then waits. The doors do not close. She peeks out into the hallway, looking left, then right, as if searching for something, or someone. Then, she moves in an erratic way, stepping back into the elevator, waving her hands in a motion that seems unnatural. Some said it looked like she was talking to someone unseen. Others believed she was hiding. But from what? There are theories. Some say she was experiencing a mental health crisis, that her behavior was the result of paranoia or hallucinations. Elisa had spoken openly about her struggles with bipolar disorder. Could this have led her to wander, disoriented, onto the roof? Could it explain her actions in the elevator? The way she moved? The fear in her body language? Others are less convinced. They point to the inconsistencies, the missing time stamps in the footage, the way the doors refused to close, the strange gap in the official reports. They ask how she got past locked doors, how she climbed into a tank designed to be nearly impossible to access. And, most chillingly, why no one saw her do it. Then, there are those who believe something else was at play. The Cecil Hotel has a history, one that stretches back decades, one filled with violence, tragedy, and death. Some believe Elisa wasn't alone that night. That something unseen, something long tied to the hotel, was with her in those final moments. Watching. Following. Leading her to a place she could never return from. Theories continue to circulate. The case remains open to speculation. But there is one truth that cannot be ignored: Elisa Lam entered that water tank. How she got there is a question that may never be answered. The case of Elisa Lam leaves us with more questions than answers. The security footage shows her acting strangely, moving in ways that seem erratic, unsettled. But was she truly alone? The police report states that there was no evidence of foul play. No signs of a struggle. Yet something, something, led her to that rooftop. Something brought her to the edge of that water tank. And something kept the truth just out of reach. If she had been running from someone, why is there no proof? No witnesses. No sounds of a chase. The hotel had other guests. Staff members walked those halls. Yet no one saw her in distress. No one reported anything unusual. And yet, days after her disappearance, her body was found in a place she never should have been. So the question remains, was Elisa truly alone that night? Or was there something, or someone, just beyond the camera's view? Then, there is the hotel itself. The Cecil Hotel has a history most would rather forget. Murders. Suicides. Unexplained deaths. For decades, the walls of this building have held stories of tragedy, each one more unsettling than the last. Was Elisa simply the latest chapter in its long, haunted past? Or was she another victim of something deeper, something no official report could ever explain? Even today, no one knows the full truth. Her case remains a mystery, one that continues to disturb, to intrigue, to leave us wondering what really happened on that cold January night. But now, the question is yours to answer. What do you think happened? Some mysteries are never meant to be solved. They linger, unfinished, incomplete. The questions remain, stretching across time, refusing to fade. A family slaughtered on their own farm, their killer living among them. A child left nameless for decades, his story buried beneath the weight of silence. A group of hikers who walked into the unknown and never returned the same. A young woman whose final moments were caught on camera, yet still, we cannot explain them. We search for answers. We examine the evidence. We reconstruct their last steps, hoping to make sense of what they saw, what they felt, what they feared. But no matter how deep we dig, some stories refuse to be understood. Some endings are lost to time. These cases remain among the most chilling mysteries ever recorded. But which one unsettled you the most? Which story will stay with you long after this night ends? Let me know in the comments below, and if you find yourself drawn to the unexplained, subscribe for more mysteries. And if you're still awake, if sleep still refuses to come, I have another case for you. One that is even more disturbing. One that you won't be able to forget.